Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. For our next plenary session, let me introduce the moderator, Professor Hyunmi Kim, a professor in the Department of Cultural Anthropology here at Yonsei University. So this plenary session will discuss about care economy for social sustainability. Professor Kim, the stage is all yours.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 한국말
Good afternoon. I will moderate in Korean. It is a great pleasure to be here as a session moderator in today's forum. Throughout today's sessions, I learned a lot, so we will continue with that momentum. And in this session, we're going to talk about care economy for social sustainability. With me, I have two panelists. Rather than talking about the hope for sustainability, I think the fear about insustainability is really prevalent around the world. Deepening social inequality, climate crisis, and all these are leading to many problems in our society. And this is very concerning. To solve this, we need to pay higher cost in terms of human resources and financial costs. So far, the economic system has been geared towards economic development and growth. But now we need to think about care economy in order to solve the current challenges faced by the Korean society and many countries around the world. And that is the big theme of today's forum. So to tackle this issue of care economy, we have two panelists. One is actually from New York, Professor Nancy Fulbright. She is going to join us shortly. It's actually 2 a.m. New York time. So we will first listen to the Korean panelist. And our Korean panelist is going to tackle a really grave danger faced by the Korean society, which is declining birth rate in Korea. So we will first hear about the Korean case, and then as soon as our speaker from New York comes online, we will invite her for her presentation. So the first speaker from Korea is Professor Youngmi Kim. She's such a celebrity professor, so she doesn't need introduction actually. She's been very active in many policy areas, low birth rate and child rearing, and also universal basic income issues as well. And she earned her master's degree and PhD in Seoul National University. And I'm sure you're familiar with her working as a policy advisor to the Korean government. She's been providing a lot of advice to the Korean government in terms of women's policies, and also she served as the vice chair of the Presidential Committee on Aging Society and Population Policy for years. And she also co-authored and co-translated many books on this issue. So as she had spearheaded the government policy efforts to tackle aging society and low birth rate and declining population issues, she will give us a talk about how we can what kind of perspective we can use to look at this issue and what could be our path forward. So with that, I'd like to ask you to welcome Professor Kim with a warm round of applause.
예, 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to see you. So Professor Kim, our moderator, gave me such a generous introduction, so I feel a bit pressured to deliver my talk. But this is actually my first public talk after I stepped down as the vice chair of the Presidential Committee on Aging Society and Population Policy. My topic is the way forward for better population policies in the era of sustainability crisis. So it talks about my scholarly perspective, but also a perspective from a policy advisor, since I've worked in that capacity for the Korean government. The whole world is talking about the population crisis here in Korea. But actually here in Korea, many people are denying that we are in that kind of crisis. Some people don't like the word crisis. But some media, they talk about this crisis in a really alarming manner. So why is this crisis? And it seems like there is still not a social consensus on the existence of this issue, this crisis. So given that, it is a really timely topic that we are dealing with here. And it is my honor to be here as a co-panelist with Professor Nancy Fulbright as well.
예, 먼저
Okay, so this is my first slide. So as you can see, the population crisis is actually a crisis of social sustainability. So if the current low birth rate is to continue, you can see that we will be faced with a declining population and a lack of social vitality, and also really a serious level of crisis of social sustainability. So the first pyramid is actually from 1960. So you can see that it is in the triangle shape, much younger population. We are now in the middle pyramid. So it's much more balanced, so to speak. But 50 years from now on, we are going to be in this upside down triangle. So the median age of the Korean population will be 65 years old. So 50 years from now on, even if you're in your 60s, you will be still a young people, relatively speaking, in Korea. And that will be a crisis, definitely. So this extremely low birth rate is leading to devaluing care services. And also it is discouraging the society from making a timely investment in this issue. Actually, because we haven't made a timely investment in this issue, we are now in this situation. So now we are going to see only an accelerating and growing need and demand for care services, but we are not prepared for that. So not only we are faced with the population crisis, but also crisis of the lack of care services. If you look at the cost, the burden of taking care of young children and elderlies, as you can see in this graph, currently 100 working people are taking care of 16 youth and 24 elderly people. But going forward, that number is going to go up to 104 elderly people in the case of the elderly people, and also more younger people as well need to be dependent on 100 people working. So half a century from now on, this portion is going to increase much more fast in Korea. So this burden of care, how are we going to mitigate that? That will be an important issue that we need to resolve. It's not going to be solved with the money. And of course, it requires a lot of financial resources. And we haven't even put enough financial resources into this effort. So that is why we also need to boost up our monetary support. But it is also about the issue of valuing the care services. So we need to take dual approach, financial approach and social approach as well. Korea's low birth rate is really unprecedented at the global scale. If you look at the total fertility rate in Korea as of 2023, it's 0.7. This is well below the replacement rate. So as you can see here, the replacement rate is 2.1. But out of the OECD members, there's only one country that is above the replacement rate, which is Israel. But Israel is now going through a war, so we are not sure if this number can stay as it is. But if you look at Korea's rank, Korea is ranking at the bottom by wide margin with the next to last country, which is Spain. And this kind of dramatic decline in birth rate in Korea, this took place in the political and social historical context of Korea. The so-called demographic cliff or dramatic drop in birth rate took place 3 times in Korea. The first time around, it was during the 1960s. So actually 1960s, the total fertility rate was about 6. So back then, women tend to have many children. But then led by the government back then. The government led family planning effort. That is when the first demographic cliff took place in Korea. So it was policy-driven population drop. So due to the policy effort, the Korean population went down. The second time around, the demographic cliff, that was due to economic factors. So we experienced an Asian economic crisis. As a nation, we experienced a quasi bankruptcy. So economic crisis was really heightened. Many families experienced poverty and job loss. So families got dispersed due to economic reasons. And many younger people, the young generation, went through their childhood in this kind of economic situation. So they learned anxiety, insecurity about the financial situation and family structure. I think that led to the second round of demographic cliff. The third round of demographic cliff took place after year 2015. So people are now studying into what happened around year 2015 and after. After year 2015, the marriage rate went down a lot. And also, even if you get married, you don't have children. And that ratio went up a lot. And also, we went through COVID-19 situation as well. And COVID-19 situation even worsened this downward trend. So in 2015, you can see a significant drop in marriage rate. And in 2022, it went down again to about 190,000. And children born out of marriage is less than 3%, but OECD countries typically over 45%. In France, it's almost 60%. 60% of children are born out of marriage. So, but in Korea, it's not the case. So as the marriage rate drops in Korea, birth rate also dropped significantly. And COVID-19, it was not just a medical crisis. It was also interconnected with the climate change and other environmental factors as well. So that really amplified people's anxiety and insecurity about environmental factors as well. That also contributed to lowering marriage rate. So in order to solve the declining marriage rate or birth rate, we also need to do something to dispel people's anxiety and insecurity about economy and future environment. So based on many studies, what we can see is that we can see some causes for the declining birth rate in Korea. We can see just many factors pointed out. But as I was serving as the vice chair at the presidential committee, I was able to talk with many young people in Korea. We can think of these major three big issues, insecurity issues. One is insecurity about employment. Nowadays, young people tend to study longer, so they tend to enter the workforce at a later age. So they are also under more economic pressure to find a job and to get married. Korea has a high ratio of students entering college. And also, girl students tend to enter college more nowadays. But the competition to get a quality job is getting intense. So this is also due to the dual structure of the employment market. Wage or job security or work-life balance or working environment. In terms of these indicators, people now want a really quality employment in these criteria. So people are competing for relatively speaking, smaller opportunities of decent employment. That is also why it's not easy for younger people to get married and have children. Second insecurity factor is housing. Particularly, this is a big issue for young population living in urban area. About 54% of younger population is living in Seoul metropolitan area. So if you look at the decline of the birth rate in Korea around that time, there was a massive influx of youth population from provincial areas into the Seoul metropolitan area. And the total fertility rate particularly went down below 1. That is also due to rising real estate price. Third factor is the burden of care cost. So far, the Korean government made a lot of policy efforts, yet still in terms of quality and quantity is not enough. And the rise and decline of a state, of a country is no longer solely dependent on the economic growth. So as I go and meet with many opinion leaders, I always emphasize this. Now, the success formula during the 20th century doesn't work anymore. Korea achieved a fast economic growth based on our past success formula, but as a result, now we are dealing with a declining marriage rate and declining birth rate. Now, younger generations are more educated and they grew up in a more affluent environment, but their marriage rate, their birth rate is actually going down because of their heightened anxiety and insecurity. So unless we resolve that, it's not going to be easy to fundamentally solve this issue of a lower marriage rate and birth rate. So we really need to reset some values and policy priorities here. And my next point is that the rise and decline of a nation is now dependent on family well-being. Family well-being will determine the happiness and the sustainability of the given society. In the Korean society, we sacrifice the family for the sake of economic success. We sacrifice the family quality time to achieve economic success. So as a result, we have economic success, really spectacular. Nevertheless, the price we paid was very high. That also means that we need to come up with a new success formula for the 21st century. So the graph here, the table here, is actually from Pew Research Center in the US. So they surveyed 17 countries. They asked, what is meaningful in your life? What makes your life meaningful? Out of 17 countries, 14 countries answered family as number one priority. But in Korea, material well-being was the number one priority. So for Korean people, what makes Korean people's life meaningful? Family was only number 3 factor. In Spain, it was number 4. Family was number 4. In Taiwan, again, family was number 3 factor. And these countries commonly deal with a very low birth rate, Korea, Spain, and Taiwan. So this is not a coincidence. So Korea's population crisis is a crisis of values, family values, and community values, also a crisis in family relationships. When we talk about family crisis, the older generation, they think about we need to restore traditional family structure or traditional family values. So among many older generation policymakers that I met with, this is usually their answer. But that answer is not going to serve to alleviate the current situation. I think that kind of answer can actually worsen the current situation. We need to come up with the values that are consistent with the new generation. So we are talking about some cultural change here. So
한국의 청년
So the graphs here, as you can see, is a great illustration as to how fast Korean younger generation's values about marriage and family is changing. Very low percentage of younger population saying positive things about marriage. So only 30% in the case of male, and only about 20% among female, but non-marital cohabitation or and also currently the birth rate, it is not really socially acceptable yet to have a child out of marriage. But if it becomes acceptable, then younger generation is saying, yes, I can have a child outside a marriage if that becomes more acceptable. So things are changing. So values among our younger generations are changing. So we need to reflect that in our policy efforts as well. So this slide talks about a lot of kind of cultural lag that's happening in Korea. So the slide tells you about the severity of a declining birth rate and also career disruption for women. And also this graph, it talks about the penalty that mothers need to go through. So the top chart, the top graph is employment possibility of men, fathers, but at the bottom is mothers' employment possibility. You can see a wide gap between those two graphs. Even compared to other OECD countries, Korea is ranking very low. So now these are real actual numbers. So Sweden, if you compare Sweden and Korea, so if you have a child under the age of 13, employment rate among Korean women only 57%, but the counterpart number in Sweden is 86%. So even if you are not a highly educated woman, even if you don't have high level of education, still younger generation want to have a job. They want to be able to work. So if you do not make it possible for the younger generation, it's not going to be easy to encourage them to have children. And fertility rebound depends on balancing work and family life, as you can see here. So we really need to provide a policy support in that regard.
고용률과 출산율이 다른
The employment rate and the fertility rate in Korea, you can see that other countries, they really turned them around. They were also going down, but they turned them around. Korea is still in the deep valley. So to turn this around, it's not going back to the old traditional family values. So we need to incorporate changing values into policy efforts. It's not just demanded by women, but the work-life balance, work-family balance is now really prioritized by both younger generation, female and male, young population. Now, let me wrap up my presentation. Then what should be our policy principles? So our policy should reflect these principles. One, fairness. From birth through education and labor, through the entire life cycle, we need to provide a fair system, irrespective of your family background, irrespective of your parents' background. You should be able to start from fair starting line. And also caregivers. We shouldn't discriminate against the caregivers. So we also need to ensure that men are also welcome to spend more time with their family. And also we need to ensure that women also can continue to work even if they have children. And second principle is flexibility. So our past education, administration, education system tend to be very rigid. Now we need to add flexibility. So maybe we might need to do some restructuring. So we need to have a flexible and family-friendly work environment for everyone's work-life balance. Third principle, sustainability. So many policy agencies are now prioritizing sustainability, for example, long-term care insurance. So social insurance package is now trying to incorporate sustainability. But beyond that, we need to really invest in social sustainability as well. So more investment in future generations and the family well-being. And these three principles, actually, as I was serving as the vice chair of the presidential committee, I hosted a meeting in April last year. And during that meeting, the committee proposed these three principles. And after that, these principles were also echoed by many other policy meetings.
요 페이지 넘어갈게요. 예. 그때 그 원칙과
So along with these principles, and also we made an announcement about the plan and objectives of the policies. So marriage and birth rate is now a matter of an individual choice. So we need to acknowledge that first, and we need to make it possible for individual to make this choice out of happiness. So this should be a happy choice for an individual to make. And the policies should be there to enable that kind of environment. And also work-life balance is really important here. So when we talk about family, then are we excluding a single person household? No, single person household, they also have family. So everyone has a family. So even if it's a single person household, they might be actually taking care of their family members. So we need to come up with a new structure where everyone can have work and life balance. So we need to change some work environment. So we need to have a short-term policy, but also we need to have a medium long-term strategy to really bring about societal changes. And that this was also emphasized during my meeting at the Presidential Committee. People are talking about how severe the population crisis is in Korea. Some people talk about really drastic countermeasures, for example, just giving away cash, for example, 100 million in Korean won. But even if I receive 100 million won as a direct cash from the government, if there's no caregiver that I can entrust with my child, is the money going to solve the problem? So cash subsidy might be just a short-term solution. We need to have a more care-friendly environment. So I'm talking about physical environment where care services are easy to find and where care services are really valued. So this is my last slide. So here, Sweden was the first country to introduce parental insurance in 1974. Sweden also used to have a very male-dominated society, but they also experienced a population crisis. But in 1974, they introduced parental insurance, and this poster is actually from 1978. Here shows their wrestling national champion. So he was a national champion for wrestling in Sweden. So here he's portrayed as a parent, as a dad. So these kind of changes, we also need to bring them about in Korea. So on that note, I'd like to end my presentation. I'm sorry about using a lot of time, and I look forward to a panel discussion. Thank you very much.
김양미 선생님께서
Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentations. Because you've worked in a very male-oriented, senior-oriented policy sector, I think it was a really good experience for you. And also you worked very hard to change perception in Korea. So I believe that your work will be a great foundation for your many future endeavors. And finally, we have our panelists from New York, Professor Nancy Fulbright. Let me briefly introduce Professor Fulbright. Well, she's actually a very well-known scholar about economics and feminism. And she's a professor emeritus of economics, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And also there is a gender and care service program. She's in charge of that program, and she's a pioneer in a care economy. And throughout the human history, women were subject to unpaid work in terms of taking care of family members. So her work is really as a pioneer in this area. And she also received a MacArthur Award for her dedication in this regard. And also she served as advisor to UN in many capacity and World Women's Society. And she authored simply many books, and 2 of which were translated into Korean, and 20 2001, Invisible Heart. It's a Korean title, Invisible Heart, and also Korean translation of her work on care economy is available. I actually recommended that book to my class, so I use it as a reference book in my class. So Invisible Heart and Care and Solidarity, her two works available in Korea. I highly recommend those books to the Korean audience here. So without further ado, let me invite Professor Folbre on her talks today. So Professor Folbre will have 20 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us despite the late hours.
예,
Thank you so much. I feel very honored and appreciative of the opportunity to participate in this conference. And I want to thank Professor Yongmi Kim for an excellent presentation of some very important specifics about Korean policy. As an economist, I want to try to link the issue of below replacement fertility to care provision in general, and to concerns that economists have about public goods, things that are unpriced, not part of our market economy, but are nonetheless really crucial to its successful performance and its sustainability. And I want to emphasize that below replacement fertility is really a global issue. It's gotten more attention and more discussion in Korea than almost any other country. And I believe Koreans are really in the forefront of developing new policies to confront this challenge. So I think it's really a wonderful and really crucial task that your policymakers are confronting. So let me just try to put it in a larger historical and global context. So half of the global population literally lives in the countries now with below replacement fertility. And as a result, I think we are being forced to rethink what we mean by economic development and economic growth, and what we mean by success in that arena. But before exploring the economic dimensions, I want to emphasize that care for others is first and foremost a moral commitment. We can't think about it purely in economic terms, but we have to recognize that it is an economic necessity, that care provision is basically the production, the development, and the maintenance of human capabilities. The production of what economists sometimes call human capital, but human capabilities extend beyond human capital because they pay off not just in the market economy and not just as a contribution to gross domestic product, but also to the performance of our communities, our ability to protect the physical environment, our ability to be good citizens. These are all the skills that are developed through formal and informal care provision. So I think it's really important to think about care as an investment. It's an investment that's costly in the short run, but pays off in the long run and is absolutely necessary in the long run. So there's a parallel between the way conventional economic theory undervalues the care economy and the way it undervalues the unpriced assets and services provided by nature. So just as we are experiencing serious problems with climate change and climate instability as a result of not valuing things that fall outside of the conventional market, we're running into problems with the care economy as a public sphere that can't be completely relegated to the market and can't be understood entirely in market terms. So sometimes economists express the concern that public commitments to the care of children and elderly will threaten to slow economic growth. And I think that's a very fundamental mistake. It's a view that really needs to be challenged. I think what the crisis of care provision shows us is that we need to redefine economic growth and to think about it more in terms of our well-being and our capabilities, and less in terms of the number of goods and services that we're able to buy or sell. In general, most of the international discussion about economic success is based on discussions of gross domestic product, or GDP, which is defined as the final market value of all goods and services that are sold. And it serves as a kind of scoreboard. This is who's doing well, this is who's doing poorly, this is how we're progressing, this is how we're regressing. It's just become a kind of obsession of economic policy and economic debate, and yet it's quite misleading, because that measure, GDP, doesn't include the value of assets that don't have a price or ecological services. So whether it's a stable climate or it's unpaid work, it's not included. Also, measures of GDP don't subtract the money that is spent on social bads rather than goods, items that have a monetary value that we spend money on, but don't necessarily make us better off. So examples of these would be pollution, resource depletion, crime, drug addiction, suicide, depression. We spend money on these things and they appear to increase our economic output, our GDP, but in fact, they're not really making us better off. So what do we mean when we refer to the care sector of the economy? It's the sector that, as I said, produces and develops and maintains human capabilities. And it includes both paid work in childcare, elder care, health care, education and social services, and the unpaid work that's provided by family and community members. And in most countries, certainly including Korea, the majority of care work overall is provided unpaid by family and community members, and it limits the ability of family and community members to earn money and contribute to the market economy. So care provision has some features that distinguish it from other forms of economic activity. It's motivated by obligation, by responsibility, by affection, by altruism, and also to some extent, economic self-interest. It involves transfers rather than exchanges. Transfers to dependents like children and the elderly, and also voluntary exchange between adults. So it creates value, it creates economic value, but it's difficult to individually capture that value or put a monetary value on it. And it also has the characteristics of a public good. It spills over and provides a lot of indirect benefits. So people benefit, employers benefit, society as a whole benefits, and yet it's not paid for on a per unit basis. For that reason, it's very hard for capitalist enterprises to capture the value that's created. And that's a reason why government and families play the predominant role within the care economy. So just to review global changes that we've experienced, in the 20th century, we experienced globally very rapid population growth due to high fertility combined with mortality decline. In the 21st century, we've seen an escalation of fertility decline to below replacement, particularly as a result or going along with dramatic growth in gross domestic product. And I think this demographic change has been very neglected and very misunderstood by conventional economic theory. And I think it's best understood as an interaction between patriarchal and capitalist institutions that's mediated by both global trends and by national cultures. So if we look back to ancient history, high mortality once made high fertility economically necessary for success. Patriarchal institutions reinforced women's responsibility to specialize in care provision, basically excluding them from participation in activities outside the family, which ensured a cheap supply of family labor and relatively high fertility. Capitalist development and technological change reduced the advantages of high fertility, and it destabilized many of the patriarchal institutions that limited women's choices. This institutional change has led to new forms of distributional conflict over who's going to pay for the costs of social reproduction, where the costs of social reproduction are just defined as the necessary care provision to keep our economies and societies going. And this conflict over who's going to pay is shaping the policies of the welfare state. And most welfare state policies are essentially redistributing income across generations, as well as between different groups within the population. What modern welfare states have done is they've socialized many of the benefits of raising children because they tax the working age population to support the health and retirement of the elderly. So the way in which health and pension programs are financed is by taxing a younger generation, and yet the actual public social contributions to raising that working age population are borne primarily by parents and mothers in particular. So that creates a fundamental inequality. So now what we're seeing is that many countries, and Korea is a very good example, have begun to socialize more of the costs of children and to try to remedy that imbalance. But in the process, they have really underestimated the actual costs and also women's willingness to voluntarily continue to pay them. And so in my view, this economic imbalance is a major cause of the fertility trends that we're seeing here in the United States, as well as in Korea. Even in the social democratic countries of Sweden, which, as Professor Yonsei Kim emphasized, have devised very important pro-family policies. These do not go very far towards compensating parents for the total cost of reallocating time away from the capitalist marketplace to the private family. So as global and national populations are beginning to decline, we need to learn how to stabilize them. And this problem of stabilizing them is very similar to the issue of how we are going to confront problems of climate change and deterioration of the natural environment. And like that, they are going to require investments. So this requires a real reorientation of priorities away from emphasis on the growth of gross domestic product. So it requires recognition of the intrinsic and the extrinsic value of producing and developing and maintaining human capabilities in an ecologically sustainable process of economic growth. So in a way, my most important point is that we shouldn't define the economy as gross domestic product. We really need to think about a more inclusive picture of what the economy is and how to make it demographically as well as ecologically sustainable. public services and public goods and services are defined here as things that cannot be bought and sold. So the physical climate, we can't just individually go out and buy more a more stable climate. And the same thing is true for the social climate, our mental health, our happiness, our well-being, problems like suicide, depression, drug addiction. These are all elements of the social climate. They affect everybody, not just those who suffer from particular problems. Human capabilities, future generations, natural capital, social capital, these are all terms that we use to describe public goods and services. And if you think about it, the future itself is a public good. The future itself is something that we can't just go out and buy over the counter. We have to really produce the future, and we need to, when conditions change, we need to adapt to the new conditions necessary to reach that future successfully. So I'm defining the social climate as kind of care, trust, tolerance, solidarity. It's fostered by families, by communities, by democratic institutions, and it affects our collective efficacy, our ability to address public goods problems, including physical climate change. We need to figure out how to get along, and how to work effectively together to address these problems. So there's a parallel between the threats to the physical environment we see on a global level: floods, tsunami, droughts, hurricanes, fires, extinctions. These are all indicators, symptoms of climate change, the destabilization of the physical climate. And likewise, in the social environment, we see these things that are parallel: poverty, inequality, crime, mental illness, drug addiction. I think war goes on that list. So when we think about living standards, instead of thinking about income, how much did income grow this year? We should be thinking about living standards in terms of access to public goods and services, access to stable climate and a healthy environment, shared responsibilities for the support and care of others, and time for personal care and leisure. So in addressing the environmental problem, some economists argue that we need to just stop economic growth and reduce consumption and reduce GDP. And I think that is a simplistic solution. I think human societies need to grow. They need to develop. They need to see a positive future, a positive trajectory. I think it's just important to the human project. And instead of thinking about degrowth, we should think about redefining growth. If we oriented our economy away from consumption of material goods towards improvements in sustainable living standards and human well-being and human services, I think we can achieve growth in an environmentally sustainable way. But this project will require much greater investment in the care economy. So I'm going to end where I started, that I think we need to reclaim the concept of investment and to see public spending on children and the elderly not as a bribe or a waste or a cost. It's an investment in our collective future. So it's not a burden or unproductive spending. It's an investment in our own hopes for longevity and reduced depreciation, as it were, of human capital. And let me just end with a couple of links that you might find interesting to look at care policy scorecards on the global level and tools for assessing country progress towards care provision, because as I've emphasized, I think this is really a global issue, and it's one that we need to address together. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm
예,
really
낸시-
looking forward to the discussion.
낸시 펄브레 선생님께서 돌봄
Yes, Professor Nancy Volbray talked about the new concept of care economy. So it's not just about gross domestic production. That was really a major indicator or index of growth or development, and it will lead to better quality of life. That has been the simplistic formula for policy making so far. But now we need to reflect on that and take a new direction. So GDP, as you know, as everyone is familiar, here is a gross domestic production. So whether it is actually bad activity, harmful activities, even if it's like Bitcoin, so it's not like unproductive outcomes, still they can be measured as a GDP. But what is not inclusive here is that the quality labor in terms of raising children, raising a child into adult, and other kind of care labor, care services are not included. And so also exploiting nature to the level of making irreparable itself. Those costs are not included in GDP, but these are really important elements that constitute real quality of life. So ecosystem resources, how can we incorporate ecosystem resources into care economy, for example? So we need to come up with a new economic growth model. So I think that was the gist of Professor Fulbright's talk. Is really great. And also I study into gender economics as well. So regrowth as opposed to degrowth, regrowth or reimagined growth. These were really great concept for me. So in that, I'd like to ask you a question due to the time limit. So degrowth is basically about, so a lot of products were reviewed from commercial values, but now we need to think about, for example, ecosystems benefit. We want to keep healthy ecosystem, and also we need to counter many global challenges. So to do that, do you propose a new concept of a regrowth that can help us to deal with environmental crisis and population crisis as well? So regrowth, I understand it as a new paradigm for growth. So given that, my question to you, Professor Fulbright, is, and also equitable allocation of care labor, for example, is important, I believe, because women have been primarily provider of care labor, and that pointed out as a social issue. Then it led to introduction of migrant workers to replace women for care labor. So that became an issue as well. So now, and also because we emphasize on care economy, still the labor of care is mostly done by women. So we are witnessing the feminization of the care labor. So it's all done by women still. So we emphasize on caring for people, and then we impose the labor of care on women predominantly. So that becomes an issue as well. So regrowth. So how is it a better model compared to degrowth? In terms of also dealing with this labor of care falling predominantly on women as well. So if you can answer that question.
부탁드립니다.
Those are such great questions. I think a good place to start in thinking about what regrowth means is to just describe to you changes in our economic accounting system that are being developed that could give us a better scorecard for evaluating our success. So now in many countries, economists are taking data from time use surveys and looking at exactly how much time is being spent on care provision and who is spending that time, and then estimating what the market value of that time would be if you had to hire somebody to do it, and then adding that to the larger picture of conventional GDP for what are called satellite accounts. And environmental economists are doing something similar with an inventory of natural assets and ecological services. That is trying to estimate, trying to translate what their value is in economic terms. It's impossible to place a precise estimate on it, but it's possible to at least estimate a lower bound value to it. And that creates another satellite or addition to the national income accounts. In addition to those accounting changes, there are efforts to develop an index of progress, like the Genuine Progress Index, that gives us a sense of how we are doing in terms of social indicators like mental health or mortality. Life expectancy is a really important indicator of how well we're doing in the care economy. So what regrowth implies specifically is using this broader accounting system to orient our goals and to measure our success. And I think the word maybe the word growth isn't the best word, I think, but what we're reaching for as a society is constant improvement, regular improvement, making things better, right? And in order to, in order to coordinate that effort, we have to know how well we're doing. And that's why we really need an expanded accounting system. So that's my best answer to the first part of your question. The second part of your question was about, I think, about gender inequality in care provision, and also how that gender inequality has increasingly taken the form of international migration, with a lot of countries, basically rich countries in Europe and in America, taking advantage of a flow of very low-wage immigrant women to help meet the needs of care provision. And this is kind of a short-term solution, but to me, it really shows how gender intersects with class and with citizenship and with race. The distribution of care provision is not just about the fact that women do more than men, although that's obviously really central. It's also about the fact that care provision is disproportionately provided by people who are less empowered, who have less bargaining power, who have less opportunities in the market economy. And that is also a source of distributional conflict and tension that we need to address in thinking about how to improve the big picture.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your answer. So on the GDP, the things that were not included in GDP so far, how can we better measure them and incorporate them into the growth indicator? And also many issues, for example, natural disaster requires a lot of financial resources to resolve, and also it can incur a social conflict as well. So when there is a significant cost that we need to pay, then we finally get aware of the problem, and then we set the direction to solve it. So that was a really great point. We are running out of time, but still I'd like to ask a question to Professor Kim Young-mi as well, because she deals with an important issue. I'm quite familiar with the issue of a work-life balance. So many Korean policies, when they talk about solving population crisis or low birth rate, the work-life balance sometimes seems to be too simplistic slogan used by the Korean government, and also seems to be imposed on women, or sometimes employers, corporations allow more flexible work hours to your employees. And ladies, you should do more for work-life balance. So sometimes women are incentivized to give birth. For example, what it shows is that women are often criticized as a problem of the declining birth rate, or sometimes women are praised as a problem resolver. Women are incentivized to give birth. So here it's like commoditized. Giving birth is considered as a commodity, and the government just wants to throw money at this issue sometimes. So instant monetary compensation, well, but giving birth to a child and raising the child to become a proper adult, giving the child a good education, it's not going to be solved by just throwing money at it. So my perspective is that the work-life balance, this paradigm, somehow still this is very oriented towards kind of idealized type of a middle-class family. Right now, almost majority of both the young male and females are not married in Korea. So in order to solve this issue, and to also engage younger population in dealing with this issue, what can we do? So Professor Kim, and also we just heard about care economy and the regrowth as a new kind of paradigm from Professor Fulbright. So Professor Kim, since you are the expert on this issue in Korea, so this care economy, for this concept to be incorporated into the Korean policy, what should be done? What should be the priority change? So due to the time limit, if you could answer briefly, I will appreciate it. It's a very profound, fundamental question that I'm not able to give a short answer to, but let me try. So earlier, Professor Fulbright talked about the need to redefine economic growth. And that was a really great point. And also she talked about regrowth, not degrowth. As a researcher, and also up to now, even after serving as a policy advisor, why should there be such a conflict between welfare and growth? These two values can go together. And they should go together. Certain countries, they continue to grow economically, and they also have well-being as well. These two are not mutually exclusive. We shouldn't think like that. And also well-being, welfare, for example, sometimes cash subsidy is necessary. But social services are also important. So the government needs to make more investment, or the society needs to make more investment in social services, for example, education or child care. And that can lead to more economic growth. So that should be the circular model that we aspire to. I think that is being done in Korea to a certain degree, but still, so with our mind, we accepted that this is necessary, but our heart is still reluctant to adapt to this new paradigm or new change. So we still work long hours in Korea, and we gear towards a short-term performance, a short-term outcome. But as a result, now the Korean society is dealing with drastic decline in birth rate, or lack of sustainability, even though we achieved economic growth. So in terms of the change, well, only a few years ago, when I met with the Ministry of Employment, Ministry of Labor, or Ministry of Finance, when we talk about circular economy of care, and also we need more social investment in care, and we also need to see the connection between female employment and birth rate. We need to bring them together. They can be interconnected, and they can be handled in an interconnected manner. It was so hard to make a case for this back then, just a few years ago. But now people are kind of accepting it. And we can see the results in the wording of government documents nowadays. Now these values and principles are espoused in Korean government documents. So I'm very encouraged to see that. So redefining economic growth is necessary. But what is also necessary in Korea is what constitutes a good society. What is a good society? What makes society good? That will be a society where we can have both quality of life and also economic growth. So again, these two values are not mutually exclusive. And care economy or care services is something that enables these two values to go together. So the value of care, we need to reevaluate it. We need to reevaluate the care, the service of care. And we cannot stop with just empty rhetoric. We have to really go about doing it. So from labor's perspective or social services perspective, we need to make policy efforts to connect these elements. And if I can add one more, the population crisis, declining birth rate. We all are saying that this is a crisis. So let's establish Bureau of population. No, I think we need to actually build a ministry of care if we need to build a new government agency. So care, medical service, for example, employment, all these need to be interconnected. So that should be done by policy setting. So I want to see the ecosystem of care ecosystem. I want to see that. This might sound very foreign, alien, but this is not something alien. This is something that we need to do, we need to embrace for our very survival in the future. And my role here is to accelerate the change towards this direction. So yes, it was a great point about what makes society great, and also how can we, how consuming our past success or economic model has been and led to burnout among people. And even though we achieved spectacular economic growth, it also took a toll on the Korean society, as we can see from many indicators. So we now really need to think about regrowth. So we need to come up with new ways to solve this problem, and regrowth definitely can be a way forward. And I hope that going forward, we will be able to see different models, regrowth models or care economy models, so that Korea can overcome the current challenges and move forward to a brighter future. Thank you very much for your talks, both of our panelists. Professor Fulbright, I know it's about 3:30 a.m. Thank you very much for your participation. And also thank you, Professor Kim, for your participation.
Really an amazing panel. I wrote down so many things. I don't think I can summarize this in 1 minute, but maybe with one thing that we can all leave from this panel is that care for our children and elderly is an investment, and that we must redefine economic growth for our societal well-being and for our environment. So moving on, we will take a break now for about 10 minutes until our next and last plenary session for today, calling for transformation, a critical evaluation from the majority world. See you all in 10 minutes.